Okay, officially, I'd like to welcome everyone to our summer funding debriefing to kind of talk through the process. Again, I want to remind everyone that we are recording today's session and it will be made part of our record available on our YouTube channel. If you missed something, if you want to go back, etc. For the first half of the presentation, we're going to go over some information. We do ask that you keep your devices on mute. And then when we open it up for questions, we will feel free, you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask questions. We do ask that you use the raise hand feature when we get to that point. If you know how to use it in Zoom, fantastic. It looks like this and it kind of puts your hand up. If you don't know how to use it, no worries. You can physically turn your camera on and just raise your hand and our team will do our best to call on you to ask your question. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our executive director just to provide a welcome before we actually dive into the specifics of the application. Sika?
Thank you, Holly. Good morning, everyone. I hope that you are looking forward to a good weekend. And we really appreciate you joining us this morning to talk through and debrief on the application process for summer funding. The first thing I would like to say is congratulations, believe it or not, because you submitted an application and your application was evaluated. A lot of organizations did not even get to that point. So that is important. Number two, definitely take notes, but also know that you have the opportunity to get an individual debrief with our team to kind of go through your application and talk through some things that can make it stronger for the next time we are looking to have programs in the domain that fits with your program. And then number three, know that this was a one-time funding cycle. This was our first RFA out of the gate, and we are learning just as you are learning. So we just look forward to a good debrief, good conversation. Please do not be shy about asking questions because that is how we all learn. And I will now turn it back over to Holly.
Thank you, Sika. So what we'll do is we're going to go over the criteria of the applications and how they were evaluated, and then we'll discuss the methodology for how proposals were selected. Then we'll also provide the opportunity to do questions and answers, and I'll also re-give you the link if you want to do a one-on-one specifically diving into your application. We're not going to go into individual applications on this call because what we wanted to provide is the general overview of how things were scored and then how the scores were evaluated, the methodology in essence that the council used to deploy. We wanted to do that in an open setting because oftentimes that might answer the questions that you might have, and then we'll do the follow-up should you request one using the form. And several of you that I see on here have already submitted a request that you do want to do a one-on-one. So after today, if you still want to keep that meeting, I'll be following up with our team to schedule that time to do a Zoom call for 30 minutes to dive deep into your specific application and where we can provide training and or technical assistance for potential future applications. With that, again, for anyone who's just joining a little bit late, we do ask that you keep your devices on mute until we open it up for questions to do those live questions. You can feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go, but know that we're going to come back to those after I go through this first process. With that, I am going to share my screen, which apparently I don't have the window open that I wanted to be open. Let me try this again. I'm going to share my screen. There's my PowerPoint. Here we go. If someone can give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen. Thank you, Ms. Brown. I appreciate you. All right. So we want to just start with sharing our theory of change. And the reason why we want to start here is because, well, I think that we'll always start and end with this conversation about our theory of change, because the way that we are doing work, whether it's the short-term investment or one of the longer terms, 1 to 3 year contracts that we hope to issue in the future, is that what we're trying to be is this catalyst for positive change to improve the lives and outcomes of children and families in our community. We have no doubt that every single one of you that are on this call that made an application are doing great things in the community, are doing great things with the children and youth and families that you serve. And I hope that you know that just because you were not selected this round is not an evaluation of you doing good things or not. It was just through the application process, are you able to show impact using the model and our theory of change in the way that we're looking for, and how it kind of just fell in terms of the scoring. One of the things I'll say right off the top is some of the feedback that we received is judging a program simply based on what they put on paper is not the full picture. And we do hope that as we move forward with longer term funding cycles, that we're going to incorporate an opportunity for a presentation to an evaluation panel so that you're able to share true impact in a different way. Because we know, right, that what you might look like on paper and what you might do in real life and how you present that all have strengths and weaknesses. And so we want to honor that and respect that as we move forward in funding cycles. But you'll kind of see here, especially in the middle, these areas are really where we were wanting to focus in on in terms of the work that we do. And we didn't in this funding cycle choose one of these areas over another. We really opened it up to say, what is it that you do? Where are the gaps in your current service provision that you could expand your services for this summer only and help fill that gap and show impact that way? In some cases, some of the applications talked about how a program might have been funded previously, but it's not been funded for 2 or 3 years, or that you see this big gap and it's really a longer term investment that you're looking for. And so those might not have scored as well as other programs who said, this is the gap this summer and this is how we propose to fill it. So, and then you kind of see here in this last part is really this focus on how will you show impact? And this is overall, when we look at the scores, where the lowest kind of scores showed up was around this conversation of how do you show impact? How will you show that you've been effective? And so we recognize as an organization and as a community that we're going to need to pour into this concept of capacity building, not only for the folks that have joined us today, but really for all of the programs that submitted applications, and even some of those that were selected for funding, which we'll talk about when we talk about the methodology. So I want to go on as this should look familiar to each of you. This was the proposal criteria. We had 5 categories, and the points that you see listed here was the top points for each of those sections. And when we talk about the methodology, you might see that these points were tripled because each proposal was reviewed 3 times. I'm going to go through the proposal criteria and the part that should look familiar to you based directly on the RFA that we published, and then show you the questions that the evaluators use specifically to measure each of those things that you were asked to provide. Then we're going to talk about how that worked with the methodology and how it was deployed in terms of the scoring. So again, these 5 categories should look familiar to each of you. Under organizational profile, you'll see that this was kind of the description that we asked you to provide. The description that we asked you to provide was in essence a brief overview of the primary applicant, including vision, mission, and history of service. And I want to just kind of highlight history of service, because if you would come to the training that we provided before the due dates, we really talked about this is your chance to kind of demonstrate how you've worked in this space, specifically with children's services, talking a little bit about your success and who you are. This was also the place that if you were choosing to apply as an intermediary, and that's in that 5th category of special designations that we'll get to in just a moment, this is where you would list if you were applying as an intermediary, and if you were, you had to include letters of agreement from each collaborating organization. Again, this is only as applicable. So truly the big points were going to come from this kind of your vision, mission, and history of service, and how adequately did you describe those. So on this next slide is the directions provided to the evaluators. How fully does the applicant respond to the required items? And it was noted which ones were required. So for example, you'll saw on that list, if you were a nonprofit, we did ask you to upload your nonprofit status, but that was not a required item. So if you did not upload that, it's not like you lost points for not being a nonprofit. However, if you uploaded an expired insurance certificate, that was noted. If you skipped the insurance certificate, or you uploaded something that wasn't an insurance certificate, or it was just a quote for insurance, that was noted. And I can't, with everyone that's on here right now, I can't say if it was you or you, but that happened. So know that that was looked at. The same thing with your business registration. There were several applicants who were deemed inactive in SunBiz, or they had allowed their business registration to lapse. Again, that was noted. It didn't mean that you got a 0 for this category, but it was noted, and all of the evaluators in essence had the full scale. So in this case, it was a 10-point scale. So they could rate, poor, fair, adequate, satisfactory, or extremely well. And in those kind of 5 categories, they had a range of points to choose from. The second question that we asked them was, how adequately does the applicant meet expectations for organizational experience? So again, this is going to go to that history of service question. And how adequately does the applicant demonstrate recent and successful delivery of community-based services? We really, so again, the reason why I highlighted history of service and to correspond with the training is, how long have you been in this space? Do you really know what you're doing? Because our goal was to expand services by organizations and to not fund any new programs or to pilot any new programs. So that's what we were really looking for, is how long have you kind of been in business doing this type of work. The second category was program narrative, and as you see, 40 points. This was the bulk of the points that you could earn. And so this was that overview of current services, identified need, the proposed solution, including the expected impact, and proposed data collection methods and tools. All of this was listed directly in the application, as well as on the the online portal, as well as the paper portal as well. So these were the questions. Oh, and it continued on: target population. These are all of the definite items, including complying with benchmarks and tools identified in the CSC Leon Key Outcomes and Measures database that we made available to you. So right away, you should kind of key in on, in this section, I need to make sure that I demonstrate competence in understanding that KOM. That's what the KOM is the Key Outcomes and Measures, and that you referenced it. So those applications who specifically said, I'm applying in this domain, and I recognize that these are the areas of impact that I want to influence, and these are the tools that we're looking at using, they tended to score higher than those who made no reference to any of those tools whatsoever. Our evaluators were given the following questions. Again, how fully does the applicant respond to all the required items? How adequately does the applicant demonstrate understanding of an identified need and alignment with the CSC Leon priorities? So again, like you've heard what we say that we're looking for. We were able to provide funding options A. Did we identify it as a need, or were you saying, hey, I've seen this other need, you might not have seen it. It's still a valid need, but for this particular funding application, we were saying, how does it align with the priorities that we've identified? The third question was asking you to demonstrate competence in addressing the identified needs. So it said, okay, you see a need, what is your proposed solution? And then that kind of final question was, how adequately does the applicant meet expectations for using the benchmarks that we've identified? So that's what was like the governing questions and that were provided to the evaluators, in addition to kind of like the list of criteria. Again, each of them were kind of given, we took the 40 points and we divided them into the 5 different categories. And so they had these questions, like successfully demonstrates these items, like fully meets these items, all the way down to does not address them, like with little or no evidence for each of these items. So that was at like the poor category. And so each of those were broken down. So they had that range of 0 to 40 that they were able to use in giving their score for each of these items. For the budget, and I will say that overall, for the organizational profile, most of those scores tended to be on the higher end. And the program narrative, that's really where the greatest diversity it existed, from kind of poor outcomes or poor scores all the way to the extremely well scores. There's not a single applicant that I recall that scored a perfect 40 across all 3 evaluators. Like there wasn't a single one of those. And so just know that there was definitely, this was the most diverse category for our scoring that we had. With budget, again, this should look familiar. This was exactly verbatim lifted from the RFA, really looking at the submission of your current budget versus expansion budget complete with the budget narrative. This is where, for many of you, you might recall that a lot of folks, if you used, we provided a template for you to use. If you did not use that template and it was in some other form, oftentimes you might have received a call from me or an email from me saying, hey, can you use this format? Or what you submitted did not include a narrative. And we decided to kind of give benefit of the doubt, because if you use the tool that we did and clicked print to PDF, it didn't include the column that said, but that was for the budget narrative. But to be fair, we did not label it budget narrative. And even though we discussed it and talked about it in the training, many folks, what they submitted didn't include that column. So if you did not include that column, we contacted you and said you have additional time to submit that budget narrative and what that budget narrative includes. What we realized is this is probably an area that, for capacity building purposes, folks really need some assistance with, and understanding what a budget narrative is and why a budget narrative is valuable and should always be included with any grant application, whether it's to us or to the United Way or to any other funding entity, why this is super, super important. And that's because these are the questions that we were looking to answer. First and foremost, does the applicant demonstrate that the expansion budget does not supplant existing funding sources? This was key. So showing specifically, this is our budget and this is our budget with you, and like highlighting that. If that wasn't clear to an evaluator based on what you submitted, you probably did not score very well. Or if the budget that you did submit was, say, for a 12-month period instead of a 3-month period, which is what we were asked for, you probably didn't score very well. If it didn't include that narrative, and even when prompted to kind of provide that subsequently, and everyone was given that opportunity for an expansion period of time, even after that 5 p.m. cutoff. You should have received that email that said, if you can get this to me by midnight, just that column, assuming that it just accidentally got left off, then that was included and the evaluator saw it. But if you didn't take the time to submit that, then it was not included in your application. And the reason why that's important is for this third question is, how reasonable is the budget and its estimates? If you put $5,000 for transportation, for example, and you didn't explain how you came up with that number, how are we able to see, well, is that reasonable? Maybe you're planning on, taking the youth that you might be serving on a whole bunch of field trips, then maybe that absolutely makes sense. But without a narrative to justify that expense, we weren't able to really kind of compare, will this enable the applicant to truly succeed? Are they under budget? Are they over budget? Or excuse me, not budget. Are they under resourced or over resourced in that particular line item? So that's really what we were looking for in this particular section. The fourth category was funding deliverables. And I will say that this one was probably the lowest. Again, a lot of diversity, but if you were to take the mean and not the, no, excuse me, the mode and not the average, there was a lot more lower scoring applicants in this section, again, telling us that we need to do more work as an entity to kind of explain what does a funding deliverable look like. And even though we put in here a list of suggested contract deliverables that include designated program impact. So this idea was your deliverables should align with your program narrative, not only in what you're doing so that it's including I'm going to serve X number of families, but also how you're going to demonstrate program impact. And again, while we did cover this in the training, it was clear to us in reviewing the applications that this is an area that we need to, it's an opportunity for us to invest time and resources to help applicants be able to put their best foot forward for this particular section. So the questions that we asked our evaluators to look at were, how adequately does the applicant demonstrate competence in matching value for effort to address the need? And how much doubt exists that the applicant can successfully perform the proposed effort? So that's really where you say, okay, we're going to propose all of these things listed in your program narrative, and then under deliverables, they might have only put 1 or 2 sentences or 1 or 2 items. And that really brought their overall score down if that's all that they did. Conversely, we had several folks, and many of those folks are, I will say, a more programs that have been around for quite some time. Maybe they have other funders, federal funders, national funders, whatever it might be. They're kind of they have that experience. And so you could tell in comparing, applicant A to applicant B, they've clearly done this before because they were able to talk and kind of break things down a little bit more. So again, we recognize we can do more on the front end to help programs in their kind of putting their best foot forward, really beef up this section so that you know what you can adequately do versus not do. The fifth and final category was the special designations, or what we like to call the extra points category. And this was where extra points would be awarded. Now, our evaluators have said this would have been easier if you would have included this in the actual application as are you applying as an intermediary, yes or no? If yes, do you have ABCD? Or are you applying for these extra points, yes or no? If yes, give us the pieces. Instead, the application asked the evaluators, when you read the program narrative or when you read the organizational profile, did you pick up on these items? So again, from our perspective, we could have made the application process a little bit easier. So that's a lesson learned for us. But ultimately, this was what we were awarding extra points for. And we did in the training session talk specifically about what you could do and where you would write this into it. But in essence, the questions that we asked the evaluators were these. How adequately does the applicant demonstrate collaboration with existing community providers and is applying on behalf of multiple entities? So this one was not a yes or no option. Many folks said, well, I'm working with other entities and I have these letters of support for them, but we're not. But it was not clear that they were applying on behalf of multiple entities, whereas others were super clear. We are this entity and we are working in collaboration with these 2 entities, and if selected, will actually subcontract out or do these service deliveries in partnership with, and then they had those letters of support, and in some cases even draft MOUs or memorandums of understanding between those organizations. And so those got the full points, but we did they did give partial points that if it's clear that you're working with people, right, and that you have some sort of relationship, maybe it's with a school or a partner, but it's not clear if you're actually applying on behalf of a collaborative, as opposed to just your entity that's vowing to continue to work with these partners. The other 2 questions that we asked was, does it clearly articulate an expansion plan to target inequities through the use of technology, home-based or mobile delivery of services. This was kind of a yes or no, either you're doing it or you're not doing it. Some of the evaluators were like, well, I think that they're doing it based on this, this, and this. And so we did allow them to give a partial point if they saw some evidence, even though it wasn't enough to get the full points in this criteria. Similar to the third question, are you clearly demonstrating expansion services will connect or better connect children, youth, or families to mental health, workforce development, or legal services? To get the full points for this, it did not have to be all three. It could just be one of them. Again, this was either you're doing it or you're not doing it. And there was a little bit of pushback from the evaluators where they didn't want to just give a 0 or a 3 for this particular one, like a yes or a no. They were like, well, they did offer where they saw a little bit of evidence, and they were leaning towards a 0 or a no for this answer, but they saw a little bit of evidence. And so we did allow them to give a point to that. Now, I'm going to stop sharing here because I want to talk about the methodology, and then we will open it up for questions. Let me pull the methodology up on my front screen, and then hopefully when I do the share, it will pull it up. There we go. So available on our website is a discussion. So it's right on the front page that you can kind of click on the funding methodology to understand how the council chose its applicants. Can I get a thumbs up from someone that you see what I'm doing? Okay, thank you. On this, Wendy, I saw that you raised your hand. We'll do questions in just a minute, unless that was just you giving me a thumbs up. So basically this walks through everything that we did and how decisions were made. And so we had a bank of 6 evaluators, and every proposal was reviewed by at least 3 of those evaluators, and each of the evaluators, with one exception, reviewed every single application within the primary domain that the individual applied to. There was one exception, and that was going through one of the applications. One of the evaluators says, oh, I have a potential conflict of interest because in my professional capacity, our organization is working with an organization that's already working with this group. I want to disclose that and recuse myself. In that one example, we then did pull one of the other evaluators to kind of substitute in for that one particular proposal. But for all of the others, every proposal was reviewed by 3 individuals. And if anyone wants to know, we have a breakdown of all of that, of all of those score sheets, and I believe that we have it actually available on our website of what your individual scores were by evaluator. So I can point you to that if you want to look at that score sheet. In addition to that, we also asked all the evaluators to disclose if they had any potential conflicts beforehand, so before we made the assignments. And so, for example, one individual said, well, I serve on the board of directors for entity X who made an application. So clearly that person was not going to review that proposal, but in doing so, we actually eliminated that evaluator from reviewing any proposals in that domain that applied for, because we wanted to make sure that there was fairness and kind of equity across the board and that there was no sense of impropriety. So what they did is they each scored independently. And so every proposal was given a score in those 5 categories that gave them a total. So in essence, one proposal had the potential, when you added them together, to score up to 300 points. The range of points went from 89 at the low end to 282 at the high end. We then presented the scores directly to the council and presented a couple of different ways that they could look at those scores to draw their point. At the end of the day, there was more than $4 million of asks made, and we didn't have $4 million to give. So the council had to make a decision of how they were going to draw the line, if you will, for who would get funded and who wouldn't get funded. After a very extensive conversation, the council decided to not just do a straight score of like everyone at this point and higher is going to get funded. What they chose to do was say, we recognize that if you've been in existence and maybe getting federal funding, that you're probably better at writing a grant application than maybe some of the others who are less experienced. So to give an opportunity for some equity, they chose to deploy a methodology, which I'm scrolling to, where they would identify high scores in each of the 5 categories and then fund you if you earn that high score designation in at least 3 of the 5 categories. So that means you could have excellent organizational profile and program narrative and maybe those extra points, but totally bombed on the deliverable section, and you were still selected for funding. It means that you could have done an excellent budget, all the extra points, had a great organizational profile, but maybe your program narrative wasn't super strong, and you were still selected for funding. So I want to encourage everyone to know that it was not just the high scorers that were selected, and that there was an opportunity for applicants that maybe didn't score as well in a particular category to still have the opportunity to expand their services this summer, of course, with accessing the technical assistance that our team is going to provide. So I point that out because I think that it goes to the conversation that I'm sure Sika will bring up, is that it wasn't just about rewarding excellence all across the top, but giving an opportunity for individuals to have some capacity building even within this summer. And I think that some of the conversations that took place and some of the individuals who came and spoke really helped, I'm going to say, shape that opinion of the council. So for those of you who did participate in the last council meeting where they discussed this, I really think that influenced the council in thinking through how we can build capacity in every step of the way as we're moving forward. And I think that conversation really helped them to think through future funding cycles and how we may want to designate a portion of the budgets, of the proposed funding budgets, specifically for maybe smaller organizations or smaller ask organizations, whatever that might be. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we will open it up for questions. But before we do that, I do want to invite Sika to come back up and to offer, especially from the council perspective, any bits of information I might have missed, or just to kind of frame that out as we go into the question and answer period. Sika?
Thank you, Holly. And so I see that Ms. Rita is putting questions in the chat. If you are afraid you might forget your question, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we're just we're going to go down those to make sure we answer those. So because this is the absolute first time that the council was considering awarding funding, we as the staff thought it prudent to frame and give them some options from which to start. And that's what we did. Holly did an excellent job of giving them several options. We had a 1A, a 1B, a 2A, a 2B, a 2C, a 3A, B, C, and then 3D was actually done at the council meeting at the request of a council member. And that is the methodology on which the council landed. And there are a couple of ways to think about it. So do you do it where you score the highest to lowest and you do it until all the money is gone? Do you look at percentages? Do you not take into consideration larger versus smaller, strengths versus weaknesses? And so I will say that I think that the council did a good job of trying to take all of that into consideration when they landed on the methodology that was approved. The next thing I want to say is I've gotten several emails regarding a 70%. And so I want to make it clear that if you go back into the recording, I was specifically asked my recommendation. And that was when I presented that I would recommend, I believe it was 2C, and that would have been funding all agencies that applied that achieved at least 70% of the available scores. So that would have been 70% or higher. We did have a couple of agencies that I believe were at 69.33333333, and those would have been included with just rounding up. That was not the methodology that the council chose, but I know that that was swirling out there, and so I wanted to make that clear that that was my recommendation, but that was not the recommendation that the council landed on. The next thing I will say is, while we absolutely, as a council, want to ensure that we are building capacity, offering technical assistance, and categorizing our smaller agencies versus our larger agencies, the council is wholly focused on funding outcomes and excellence. And so with that, it is going to be vitally important that as we move forward in any of our ITNs or RFAs for services, that all of our organizations that are going to apply understand that they are focusing on excellence and focusing on outcomes. And all of your application pieces need to tie back to an outcome. So it would be a good opportunity now to really go through those key outcome measures and processes, learn them for the domain where your program fits, and start looking at your program to see how it fits into any of those key outcome measures. Because when an RFA or an ITN comes forward that fits in your domain, you want to be fully ready for that. The next thing I will say is that the feedback from the evaluators was so very valuable. And we learned some elements that we need to be sure to include in future procurements to even further help our applicants. For example, a glossary of terms so that it is clear what we mean when we say key outcome measure, what we mean when we say budget narrative, what we mean when we say deliverable, what we mean by line item, all of that information. So future RFAs will contain a glossary so that there is a clear connection to the terms that are used and the parts of the application. Then the last thing I will say before we get into question and answers is that for this summer procurement, there were two things that were a focus. Number one was trying to fill gaps that had been identified by our research consultants in concert with all of the feedback that we got from provider forums and parent focus groups, as well as youth focus groups. So the council did not settle on one specific priority, but rather allowed all applicants to look at the 8 domains under our 3 priorities and determine where their program fit. So on the one hand, that is awesome because you get to have that ability to define your program. On the other hand, it becomes challenging because everyone's not sure where their program fits, and we can only judge on where you told us your program fit. So I say that because for priority funding, it is very likely that the council will choose a priority and then choose a domain within that priority to fund for this fall, because we do expect to issue another ITN or RFA this fall. So it may not be where your business is, your program is, and that's okay. We will eventually get to all of them, but because we have a finite amount of money And our goal is to try to create the biggest impact, the most outcomes. And we know we can't do that by spreading it across the domains, but rather focusing on a domain initially and then rolling out from there. So I know that there is a conversation in the community where, oh, we all will be able to apply for the fall. That is not true, because the priority that is selected by the council may not be in your priority area. And I'll give you an example, and then I'm going to turn it over for question and answers. So our first priority that we talk about is success in school and life. And there are two or three domains under there. Well, if the council decides we want to focus on stable and nurturing communities and families, which is our third priority, if you are doing anything in the early learning space, if you are doing anything in school age supports, if you are doing anything in school readiness, it would not fall under the stable and nurturing communities. So we would be looking for, in that particular priority, we would probably be looking for youth development programs, legal services, programs that work with the stabilization of the community and family, versus a program that works with school age supports, after school, enrichment, those kinds of things. So I want all of our programs, businesses, organizations to understand that this will probably be, I think I can say this, the summer could possibly be the only time we look across all the domains. And I cannot even guarantee that for next summer. We're going to see how this year goes, and then we'll see what we decide, or what they decide as a council, for how they want to look at summer funding. That being said, what I can guarantee is that all applicants will have more than 21 days to do the application. I can guarantee that, because now we are in a space where we can allow 6 weeks for you to do that application and make sure that you feel very good about it. It doesn't feel rushed, that you have the opportunity to participate in capacity building and technical assistance. And I know I said that was the last thing. I do want to say one more thing. It was very clear that organizations that participated in technical assistance and participated in one of our 2 workshops on the application process did better on their applications than those who did not. Now, there were, I want to say, 93 views of those trainings that were uploaded on YouTube afterward. But I will tell you, there is nothing like being involved in real time in the workshop, so that you are very clear on how the application needs to go. So we will continue to do that. While we will not make it a requirement, we will say, and the council has said, it is very important for organizations to participate in that and participate in TA, so that you feel very good about that application. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Holly so we can get to some question and answers.
Thank you, Sika. So we do want to allow folks to ask questions. So if you want to use your raise hand feature, a couple of questions were posted in the chat, including if you would like to request a one-on-one review of your application. Ms. Jacinta did post the link in there, and Jacinta, I'll ask you to post it again now, so it's at the bottom, so it's more accessible for folks. And then the question that first popped up was, what were the qualifications of the evaluators to judge the work that would be done, and how were they selected? And so, Sika, do you want to take that question?
Sure. So in the Program Services Committee, which brings the recommendations for our RFAs and funding to the full council, for this initial summer funding, because we were working with an expedited timeline, the recommendation was that staff be allowed to appoint members of the evaluation team for this summer RFA. and the council did approve that. So we worked to try to find what we felt was a variety of disciplines to look at these applications. So we had a representative, I can go ahead and give you the names because it is public record. So Antonio Jefferson, who is chair of the Big Bend Minority Chamber of Commerce. I always try to get that right. Big Bend Minority Chamber of Commerce. We had Lily Murphy, who is the executive director of the Florida After School Network. We had Kim Grippa, who is the executive director of the Institute for Nonprofit Innovation and Excellence. We had Dr. Michelle Gale, who is an assistant superintendent for the Leon County School Districts. We had Jessica Lowe Minor, who is a community member, local realtor, but has worked in the nonprofit field for many years prior to that. And I am missing one person.
Ted Granger.
And Ted Granger, who is the former executive director of the United Way of Florida, served as the interim executive director for CSC, or the interim administrator, prior to me, and is now currently back as the interim executive director for the United Way of Florida. We wanted to, because any entity that was able to do business in Florida and in Leon County could apply for the funding, we wanted to try to cover education, business, nonprofit in that selection. We presented that to the council. The council was very pleased with that group. And so that is how they were chosen. In the future, we will be taking volunteers, and we'll actually have a place on our website where people who would like to serve in the capacity of evaluator can fill in, give their information, give their disciplines, and also give any possible conflicts of interest, because we will be, and the council has approved, relying on our community members to help us with the evaluation of future applications.
Thank you, Sika. The next question, and I promise, Ms. Brown, I'll get to you, but I'm going through the ones you submitted first. Okay, perfect. One of the questions was there room to adjust the ask for funding if the evaluators felt that the numbers did not work? And so after, yes and no. So yes, there was an opportunity to adjust the ask, but not based on what the evaluator said because of the compressed time frame. So after the ask that they put forward was the ask that they put forward for each of the applications, and they kind of judged it that way. Once the applications were judged by the council, or determined by the council which ones we would fund, we completed a budget audit. And in that budget audit, that's where we did allow for those adjustments. So you'll actually see that the approved amount was 1.6 something originally by the council, and what was actually issued out in contracts is 1.565. And that's because we did that audit where we said, hey, on what we see here is that apples weren't really comparing to apples here. We need to adjust this, or in your narrative you included XYZ, but it doesn't match. So we've made some adjustments. So the ask, so to answer technically, yes, selected applicants who moved to the next phase in the process were allowed a little bit of wiggle room. And I think that's the best way of describing it, but not wiggle room up. It was wiggle room either down or a reallocation if something was incorrectly stated, or if it was included in like the wrong line item. If something, for example, what they coded as administrative at first, but it was really program services and salary. And so those adjustments were made. I hope that answers that question. Okay. I think the other questions, Ms. Brown, that you've dropped in the chat were answered in the chat. So now we'll open it up for verbal questions. Did you have another one that you'd like to unmute for? Oh, it won't let you unmute. Hold on. Here we go. There you go.
I'm so sorry. If somebody else has a hand up, because I can't really see them, I would let somebody else ask a question first, because I ask so many.
You're the only one with your hand up so far, so you go right ahead.
Okay. The first thing that I would like to say is I appreciate the time that you all are taking to bring this information forward. As a provider who's been in the community a very long time, it was disappointing that a program such as ours was not going to be able to be in Frenchtown this summer. But, I think futures, I don't think past. What I would like to ask and what I would like to say is that, I worked very hard to help the CSC get over the hill to be accepted in our community. And I was looking forward to, that being the case. What I would like to say is I did not even know that we were at this point of funding because there was no list that ever went out to, potential providers in the area. I know that I'm signed up, for information. I would like to say going forward, I would like to think, feel, and believe that we make a better spread of getting this information out, that this is available, so that we could have gone to those training sessions. We did our grant 4 days before it was due. And, so I'm hoping that is part of the plan.
Absolutely. So absolutely, Ms. Rita, we definitely post on our website. We do have the ability for any of you to sign up for our listserv, and that can be done on the website as well. But that being said, it is clear from your comment, and I'll tell you, I did hear it from a few others, that they didn't know the funding cycle had opened until, in some cases, 3 days, 4 days before. So we will, again, make sure that we've got plenty of notice. The council literally approved the RFA, and it opened on that Saturday. So they approved it on Thursday and it opened on Saturday because we were working with such a tight deadline. But yes, Ms. Rita, absolutely.
Any additional questions?
I see
Okay,
Kathy unmuted.
Oh, what?
I see Kathy Campbell unmuted. Kathy, do you have a question?
I'm so sorry. I don't know how I became unmuted. No, I don't. Thank you. You guys have been very helpful and very thorough.
Thank you. Again, we want to, if you see that last link in the chat, and if you don't have access to the chat, like if you're listening on a phone device or whatever, it is in your email. You can submit a debriefing with us one-on-one where we'll go through your application and your scores and can kind of provide some technical assistance after the fact. Just please make sure that you formalize that request, and we'll be following up this afternoon or first thing Monday morning to get those scheduled with you. And you'll be meeting with our team.
I also see Miss Wendy is unmuted. Wendy, did you have a question?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
The last thing I want to say before we get off is that so there were a couple of things that I noticed, and I want to say this here in hopes that as people view this, they will notice this. And then we also are going to be working on this before we get to our next funding cycle. So there were a couple of observations that I had and our team had that I want to put out there. And these came up not only during the workshops, but it was obvious in some of the applications. So the first thing is, for those of you that are running programs where you are interfacing with youth, with families, if you have any kind of property where people are coming, liability insurance is important. And we had several that like private messaged me and said, will D&O work, which is directors and officers? And that is a no. So that was a little concerning to know that we may have some programs working with children, youth, and families that do not have liability insurance to cover if something happens. So that's the first thing. There are lots of agents in town that can get that for you. We will be talking about that in some workshops. The next thing is budget. Budgets tying back to the budget narrative is important. And so what was obvious to me is that some of our organizations don't practice that when they are doing their budgets with their board of directors, if you're a nonprofit, or with your staff, if you're a nonprofit. It is vitally important to ensure that your budgets are as correct as possible and that you are clear about how you attain a specific budget number. So if you say that transportation is $10,000, then you have to show what that is. Is that this many gallons of gas times this for this duration? Is that this many Ubers times this for that? So it is very important for evaluators to see the tie between what your ask is and the narrative that goes with that ask. And then when you get to the narrative, you are further explaining why this is important. So the transportation we have requested is important because we will be transporting children to the marine biology lab once a week, transporting children here or there, going out and visiting families. So we will go through that as well. And then lastly, it is very important to look at what each category is asking and ensure you are answering that question. If there are 7 bullets in overview, make sure that you've got 7 answers for each of those bullets when you go down and do the application. So those were just some things that we noticed when we were looking through. Additionally, we expect that the council is going to approve some sort of relationship between us, the CSC, and 2 organizations in town that their mission is to help with development of nonprofits that are in any kind of, well, one is all nonprofits, the other are human services nonprofits, and that is the Institute for Nonprofit Innovation and Excellence and the United Partners for Human Services. So UPHS, you all have probably heard, as well as any. So we expect to have some sort of relationship with them to be able to provide this kind of capacity building and technical assistance, in addition to what the council will do in our workshops that will precede any of our RFPs or ITNs. Ms. Brown, Ms. Rita. You're on mute, Ms. Rita.
Yeah, the last question that I have. So what I did once, I found out what the outcomes were, I called some of the programs that did receive funding anonymously to ask questions on how they would be sourcing out the children that they were going to utilize and things of that nature. And some of the answers, as a person who is a provider, were quite concerning. So my question is, what is the follow-up to make sure that these entities, are there going to be site visits to these programs to see them actually in action doing the work they say they're going to be doing?
So I think there are a couple things. Number one, everybody who receives funding will be doing monthly reports as well as a final report. And those reports have to tie back to what you said you would do. If you indicated that you were serving children in a specific zip code, then we will need to have the information showing that you serve those children in that specific zip code. If it turns out that an organization did not comply with what they said they would do, because remember, in this application, we allowed you to tell us which KOM you were linked to, and then tell us what you were going to do. And then that is on what you will be evaluated. Then we could be in a situation where we are recouping funding. I can't say for now that there will be site visits, only because we are working with a short period of time and a short staff. And literally, Jacinta and I are the 2 full-time staff. Holly is one of our contracted staff persons. However, Ms. Rita, we will put that into our bank to see if there is a way that we can accommodate that other than the reporting that each is required, for us to do. That also being said, we are an open door. And so I don't want to make it seem like people tattletale. That's not what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. But what I am saying is if there are concerns out there that people see and need to bring that to our attention, they can absolutely do that. And we can work within our structure to follow up on that, to ensure that the organizations that got funded are doing what they said they would do.
And I'm going to just kind of follow up with, as a provider for so long, what I write and what I do is so easy to do differently. If there's a lot of money going into this CSC, and one of the biggest challenges that people had with even being positive about allowing this to happen in the tax base was what the monitoring of this money would be. We specifically went out to say, because I serve a population, technically, if I got this money, I could just kind of hand it out to the people I already serve. And that is very self-serving, I think. So I think that it is important that as we're giving this money out in these streets, that we think about reaching people we normally wouldn't have. We were going over to the Joe Louis projects. We kept rooms open in our facility to specifically bring in people who would otherwise not be able to participate. And I think that as we're thinking forward, and this is all new, I really do believe that particularly when it's direct service, all the money that's being collected, I can't imagine anyone not approving utilizing some of those funds for this kind of monitoring. And to the insurance piece, I would recommend that if you do have people that are serving children, that you give that information to the Department of Children and Family Services, because there are also requirements to serving children in regard to summer programs and things of that nature. So the Department of Children and Services will be very clear in what those requirements are, and they will go and monitor those entities to make sure that the providers are in compliance to be able to serve children.
Thank you, Ms. Rita.
Mm-hmm.
I think Holly had to jump off. So I see Courtney, I see your hand up.
Good morning. Thank you for offering this space. A quick question to mirror Mrs. Brown's statement. At the end of the summer, is there a system that is in place to track the success of the program so that way it's viewable to the public? And if so,
Yes.
Is it possible for the success stories to be listed on the website so that way we could, future applicants could essentially have an idea as to what you guys are expecting?
Absolutely. So part of what we will do is have a final report that basically illustrates or presents to the public what the impact was this summer with that programming, what the final numbers were. If we ended up having programs that didn't use all the money and had to give it back, because that is concerning as well, because you said you could do this, that you asked for this money. It turns out you didn't do that, so you couldn't, use all the money. I think that's concerning. That is important for the public to know as well. But yes, success stories, evidence of how the money was used. I do want to emphasize that this was an expedited funding cycle, and I can't emphasize that enough, because that meant that everything we were doing was moving fast. It was absolutely moving fast. While we had applicants tie the work back to the KOM and back to those key outcome measures, our expectation was not that needles would be moved this summer. So we would see a decrease in the number of families in hunger this summer, not with this quick turnaround time, and not with the understanding that we were trying to ensure that gaps were filled, identified gaps for the summer were filled. So I know that is an expectation, and this kind of goes to your comment, Ms. Rita, because absolutely, I've heard from everybody, it's supposed to be this, and it's supposed to be that, and it's supposed to be, and this is disappointing. I get it. I totally understand it. But I also believe that there was not, and it falls on us, there was not a clear understanding of what this funding was meant to do. And it was meant to try to expand on existing programs to help additional children, youth, and families access services. In some cases, it was capacity building. In other cases, it was summer school spots. In other cases, it was enrichment. So I do not expect to see a needle move from this summer's funding, but rather to see that more children, families, and youth were able to participate in some programming that they otherwise may not have been able to participate, or that services that are currently being offered to the participants were able to expand and thereby accomplish another goal that is going to be important for those children, youth, and families. Again, moving forward, there will be much more time to apply, much more time to contemplate the ITN itself, much more time to ensure that the applicants understand. And let me say that we can ensure, that doesn't mean every applicant is going to understand it, but we can do our part to give the information in a way that it is understandable, very clear, and give our applicants the highest opportunity to show how their program can make a difference. And so, yes, so we expect to show all of that, to show the investment, to show the number of children, youth, and families that have been served, and to show the stories of those who participated in this expanding funding opportunity. We have any other questions? Okay, so we thank you for participating in this. I am every time I do something, I'm learning even more and more and more. Just as a reminder, we do have a workshop on the final needs assessment that will be coming on June 16th. It starts at 1 o'clock. Now, we will not be having public comment for the workshop because it's designed to allow the council members to really interact on the information they will receive. At 3 o'clock on that same day is the council meeting at which the final needs assessment will be presented. And as always, we have an area for general public comment as well as comment on each individual agenda item on which the council will be voting. That will be held, both of those will be held at the Leon County Commission Chambers at 301 South Monroe, top floor, 5th floor of the courthouse. You can tune in via YouTube live stream, or you can feel free to be present because we know that we will probably have lots and lots of comments, and we will take all of that in so that next time it gets even better and gooderer, as I think Zig Ziglar says, gooderer and gooderer each and every time. Please feel free to ask for that individual one-on-one. We are here to do that. Now is the time to do that. And if you have any other questions that we didn't go over, you can feel free to email us. We will get back to you as soon as possible. And thank you again for being committed to our community, to our children, our youth, and our families. And we really do look forward to partnering with many of you at some point in the future. All right, thank you guys.